welcome to the worship service of Talbott Cumberland Presbyterian Church on this, the fourth Sunday of Advent. I don't know if you've been counting down the number of days that are left until Christmas. Many people use Advent calendars. They let you mark off in some ways how many days are left. Karen gave me one this year. It's wonderful. It has little pieces of chocolate for each day leading up to Christmas. Of course, our church has been tracking the Advent season through the lighting of the candles of hope, peace, and joy. Today, we light the fourth candle in the Advent wreath, the candle of love, and we'll consider God's incredible love for us, that love that was shown through the birth of the Christ child.
Light the Advent candle for think of joy forevermore. Christ child in a stable born, gift of love that Christ was born. Candle, candle, burning bright, shining in the cold winter night. Candle, candle, burning bright, fill our hearts with Christmas light.
I've always loved the 1946 Christmas fantasy film, It's a Wonderful Life. It's directed by the great director, Frank Capra. Many of Capra's films really focus on the idea of the American dream, what people can accomplish if they put their mind to it. If they focus and work hard, their dreams can come to life. Capra's film, It's a Wonderful Life, actually challenges some of those ideas. In the film, Jimmy Stewart plays George Bailey. He's from Bedford Falls, New York. In the movie, George runs the building and loan, but he has bigger dreams. Unfortunately, he's never able to see these dreams come to pass. Some kind of crisis or calamity always seems to happen. In fact, towards the end of the movie, he ends up distraught. He's ready to end his life, standing on this bridge overlooking this river on Christmas Eve. That's when he encounters his guardian angel. I like It's a Wonderful Life. In fact, when my girls were younger, I insisted that they watch it. My youngest really didn't like the movie. I remember her telling me, "Dad, this should be called It's a Terrible Life, except for the last 5 minutes." And George Bailey really does experience a lot of loss. He loses his hearing. He loses his father. He has to sacrifice his honeymoon. His plans for a venture around the world, they disappear. He's never able to escape Bedford Falls. One by one, all of George Bailey's hopes and all of his dreams seem to vanish. It's a Christmas movie, but in many ways, it's the story of loss. Perhaps it's an appropriate movie for this Christmas, for us. For many of us, this Christmas has been a time of loss. It's a loss of traditions. It's a loss of the way we used to live. It's a loss of the opportunity for us to see our loved ones, the loss of the freedom to travel. For some of us, the virus means a loss of our livelihood. Other people have been isolated from people that they dearly love. Schools have been closed. Businesses have been bankrupt. Our whole world has been turned upside down. And for some, it even means the loss of their health or even someone they love. This Christmas, for many of us, we might feel like George Bailey, looking down from that bridge on Christmas Eve, the pain of loss weighing so heavily on our souls. In Frank Capra's film, on that desperate Christmas Eve, George Bailey meets his guardian angel, Clarence. And Clarence teaches him something. He teaches him the value of life. He says, one life touches so many others. As the angel shows him this truth, George Bailey, his perspectives, they change, even in the face of great loss. In this film, George Bailey realizes he can make a difference. It's a Wonderful Life. It's at the top of the 100 greatest films as ranked by the American Film Institute. And it's considered by some to be the most inspirational of films of all time. It's a film of loss, but we all can relate to loss. It's a universal experience. We lose things in big ways and in small ways. I can relate. I lose my keys every week, at least once. The book of Isaiah, it talks about loss. It's the prophet's meditation on loss. He's standing on the bridge of trouble, looking at the churning water of the history of Israel. And even as he foresees the destruction of the temple and the exile of the people of Israel, he's like Frank Capra's guardian angel. He sees hope. Isaiah integrates this message of hope into his words of judgment. In Isaiah 9, the prophet writes, "The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in the land of deep darkness, a light will shine. You will enlarge the nation of Israel, and its people will rejoice." In one place in the book, Isaiah describes this hope as Emmanuel. That means God with us. God will forgive the people of Israel. God will redeem and restore Israel. Isaiah paints this picture of a new Jerusalem and a new rescuer, a person to save the people. This is where it really gets interesting, because this Redeemer in the book of Isaiah, this one who will rescue Israel, he is a person who will suffer for the people. In Isaiah 53, the prophet's words describe this leader. "He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised, and we did not care. Yet it was our weakness he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. All of us, like sheep, have strayed away. We have left God's path to follow our own. Yet the Lord laid on him the sins of all of us." This is a picture of the suffering servant, the person who endures pain and sacrifice to set us free. Isaiah presents us with a Redeemer who brings us back into relationship with God, not through power, not through violence or domination, but through suffering. On this Christmas Eve, we're going to have a special service. You can join us online through YouTube, Facebook, or the church's website. It will be a wonderful service with lots of musicians, harp music, flute, drums, and beautiful Christmas carols. One of the songs that we're going to sing is "O Holy Night." You remember the words from that song? "Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth." We have this image of the world pining away in deep sorrow, really brokenhearted. It's a world that experienced great loss. It's like George Bailey standing on that bridge. There seems to be no way out, but Christ is with us. It's the promise that Isaiah spoke about. The people who walked in this darkness have seen a great light. Just like that carol says, "A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn." Jesus is the answer, really, to our pain and to our loss. You remember the story that Jesus tells about the shepherd who has a loss? He's lost his sheep. In Luke 15, Jesus says, "If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders." Let me ask you something. Does that make sense to you? In the first century, Shepherds were employed to safeguard someone's sheep. A shepherd stayed there all day counting sheep. It sounds like it could be very sleep-inducing, doesn't it? But at any time, this wild animal could come along and eat one of the sheep or even attack the shepherd. So it seems like it could be monotonous work, but then also terrifying work at the same time. But what if one of those sheep were gone, was lost? Would it make any sense to leave the 99 sheep there in the wilderness? That's what the story says, leaving them in the wilderness to go and look for the one lost sheep. Doesn't sound to me like that's good shepherding technique. You probably want to watch over the 99 sheep and just hope that that other sheep finds its way back. But that's not what the parable says. You know, the logic of the parable says that the shepherd leaves the 99 sheep there in the wilderness, vulnerable, to look for that one lost sheep. That tells you how valuable that one lost sheep is to the shepherd. Then Jesus shares a second parable. In Luke 15, Jesus says, "Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she will call in her friends and neighbors and say, 'Rejoice with me because I have found my lost coin.'" In Greek, this lost silver coin is a drachma. It's one of the world's earliest coins. The word drachma actually comes from the Greek word to grasp. Originally, this coin was equivalent to the worth of a handful of arrows, something that someone would grasp. You know, in New Testament times, in the first century, a drachma was equivalent to about a day's wages. So for a poor woman, 10 drachma could represent a significant savings. They could have even been worn, these coins, as kind of an adornment, a type of jewelry. If this was the case, you can see how easily it was that a coin could be lost. Well, in this story, one of the coins is lost, and the woman seems very, very concerned. She lights a lamp. She can't wait until morning. She lights this lamp and she begins to sweep and clean her entire house. She searches and searches. It reminds me when I've lost my keys. But what really is interesting is when she finds the coin. What does she do? The parable tells us that she calls together all of her friends and neighbors. In Greek, these are female friends. And she celebrates that it's kind of the idea that she throws this big party and invites everyone. Now, does that make sense? A party costs money, and this coin is valuable, but it's not that valuable. She throws this big party to celebrate, and it may cost even more than the worth of the coin. What are these parables telling us? They are telling us how God measures value. The lost sheep was worth leaving 99 other sheep vulnerable in order to search out. The coin is worth throwing this large party for all your friends and neighbors. The worth of what is lost is out of proportion. It's out of proportion to what you expect. That speaks to us about God's love. You know, in Romans, the 5th chapter, the 8th verse, it says, "God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners." And of course, in John 3:16, Jesus says, "For this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life." God's love transforms the value of our lives. It almost makes no sense. Our lives, your life and my life, it's worth Jesus' birth and death on the cross and resurrection. This is the reason we light the 4th candle of Advent, the candle of love. It shows us the great love expressed in the birth of the Christ child. It's a love that's out of proportion for anything we have done. God's love is so immense, it embraces us even as we walk in the darkness. It makes no sense. It is a love that reaches out to us in the midst of loss, in the midst of difficult times, and tells us about our own worth in the eyes of God. The angel Clarence tells George Bailey, "You see, George, you really have had a wonderful life. Don't you see, it would be a mistake just to throw it away." In the midst of loss, God comes to us and affirms that God cares. That's the grace of Christmas. That's the way that God works. Even in the midst of devastation and loss, there can be a wonderful life. You know, that was true for Mary and Joseph without a decent room in which to give birth. It was true for H.A. Ray and his wife Margaret. Hans Ray met this young woman who would someday become his wife in Germany. That's where the two were born. And they connected again when they were in Brazil. Hans was working there as a bathtub salesperson, and Margaret had moved there from Germany. They were both Jewish, and so they left Germany with the rise of Adolf Hitler and Nazism. In 1935, they were married, and they moved back to Europe, but they moved to Paris. And the couple worked together, and they began to write children's books, children's literature. Margaret was primarily the storyteller, and Hans, or he was called H.A., he was the illustrator. Now in Paris, they created this book, Cecily G. and the Nine Monkeys. And it wasn't especially popular, but it had a very interesting character. And the couple decided they would work on another book all about this character. So they completed this manuscript. But this was 1940. And before they could get that work published, Germany invaded France. And since the Rays were Jewish, Hans quickly assembled 2 bicycles, and just hours before the invasion of Paris, he and Margaret escaped the city, and they carried their meager belongings on these bicycles that he had built, and in their belongings there was this manuscript for this children's book. They were able to flee France, and eventually they got a visa and they got to go to New York City. And there they found a publisher for this manuscript. In 1941, Curious George was first published, and it was an instant success. The Rays were quickly asked to create a whole series of books. The original 7 books have sold more than 25 million copies, and the book that they carried out of Paris on their bicycle, that book, Curious George, it's never been out of print. Now there are television shows, there's a movie, all about this character of Curious George. He's loved by children all over the world. You would never know the crisis out of which this book arose. You know, much more is true about that stable and manger in Bethlehem. From the midst of a troubled time in the lives of 2 young people, God brought new light into the world. God transformed human history. This is a story of God's transforming love.
Infant holy, infant glory, for his bed a cattle stall, oxen lowing, little knowing, Christ the baby's Lord of all. Swift are winging, angels singing, Noel's ringing, tidings bringing, Christ the baby's Lord of all. Christ the baby's Lord of all. Flocks were sleeping, shepherds keeping, vigil till the morning grew. Saw the glory, heard the story, tidings of a gospel true. Thus rejoicing, free from sorrow, praises voicing, greet the morrow. Christ the babe was born for you. Christ the babe